The path to success is seldom simply up and to the right. Sometimes big challenges happen. Sometimes we almost fail. Today's guest will help us think about those moments and how to get past the tough moments to create great success for us and our teams. Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Are you ready? Well, let's get started.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to help you lead more confidently and make a bigger difference, both professionally and personally. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's free weekly e-newsletter, Unleashing Your Remarkable Potential, which is full of articles and resources to help you become a more confident and successful leader. Sign up by going to remarkablepodcast.com/newsletter. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We said from the start that when we would do this, that we would have leadership experts and expert leaders. Today, we have someone who is both. Let me introduce you to Todd Palmer. Todd is the CEO and entrepreneur of Diversified Industrial Staffing and has been for over 25 years. He knows the struggles that business leaders face in creating both a work and life integration. As his company was approaching 10 years in business, things were ugly. He had a toxic culture. He had a huge debt of non-startup debt and almost no cash, and a strategy that made day-to-day excruciatingly unenjoyable. How about that? All of that was going on while he was raising his son Tyler alone as a single parent. With the mindset shifts and business techniques shared in his new book, From Suck to Success, a guide to extraordinary entrepreneurship, he transformed his company into one of the fastest growing in America, landing it on the Inc. 5000 6 times. We'll talk about that and a lot more. But Todd, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. I love your introduction. I wish I could just take you everywhere I go. I'd probably get better tables in restaurants.
Well, I know your mom probably wrote the intro, so I was just happy to share it. So I often ask people at the start of our conversations, Todd, about their journey, and I want to get into the specific situation that you talk about in the start of the book that I hinted at already. I don't want to do that yet. I just want to talk in general, like sort of what's your background? How did you sort of end up doing what you're doing now?
So, yeah, well, I appreciate the question. So I think for me, being an entrepreneur started off when I was really, really young. I had some challenges in my youth that came about through no fault of my own or anyone else's. I lost my dad when I was 5 years old. And within 90 days, my mom went back to work. She'd always been a stay-at-home mom. My older brother got an athletic scholarship out of state, went to pursue that. And my older sister went off and got married and moved to Arizona with her new husband, which we knew was happening. But within 90 days, I was very much alone. And so as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, I became very self-reliant in my head, which was a blessing and a curse. Because as an entrepreneur, as a startup entrepreneur, I was really good at doing multiple things because I got very good at being self-reliant. I could do sales, I could do operations, I learned QuickBooks, one of the very first versions ever. I could handle HR and operational processes, policies, and procedures. And I had, gotten very good at taking care of me and my own. I was, as you mentioned, I was a single dad. Still, I am a single dad, and I was very good at taking care of my son and I. And we kind of created this little tribe, almost like a little gang of the two of us. But really, when I pull back now at my ripe old age of 52, it was a boy raising an infant. It was a boy raising a child. And fast forward into starting a company, I got into being an entrepreneur because I thought I could do it better. I thought I had a better mousetrap. I saw an opportunity in the marketplace. And I didn't really like having a boss. I know anybody who's an entrepreneur right now would probably be able to relate with that. And anybody who's working in a large leadership corporation probably has to deal with people like me. Like that person who thinks they have all the answers and they're kind of that chaos creator. And I learned that worked well when I started my business until I got to that tipping point where I got $600,000 in debt due to my choices. And in those choices, I'd surrounded myself with a toxic and dysfunctional culture that I had allowed to occur. And so for me, it was very much to change my outside world, to change the company. I had to look within. I had to do inside out leadership. I had to raise my hand, ask for help, and hire a coach, because being reliant and being self-supportive and self-sustaining wasn't getting me where I needed to go.
So we'll talk about that in a second, but I want to go back to the moment. You talk about it. You talk about the moment in the I think it's in the forward of the book, where you realize like this ain't working, and I've got to do something else. $600,000 in debt. It doesn't look good. I don't have the cash to go another 60 days or something along those
That's
lines.
all true. Yeah.
And so you had the moment. And while not everyone that's watching or listening, Todd, will have had the same moment. Many of us as leaders, as humans, have had a moment like that. Talk about how that went for you and how you got past it.
Well, I think I need to share with you how I got there as well. And I hit rock bottom. And, I've got clients of mine who are in 12-step programs. I've got clients of mine who've had struggles in other parts of their lives. And we all talk about when we reach rock bottom. And we get sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yep.
I got sick and tired of my itty bitty shitty committee, my imposter syndrome running my life. And so I had to deal with that. And when I hired my coach, I had to share with him that I've been BSing my staff for 10 years, that I really can't read financials, not the way I needed to as the CEO. And that while I'm in the human capital space, diversified industrial staffing, I placed, thousands of people over our career. I was a conflict avoider. I wouldn't talk to people. I was very much dealing with my own insecurities, so I would just collapse within. So I had to deal with all of those things, and it all came to a head, as I talk about in the book, From Suck to Success, on September 9th, 2006, when I walked in with the help of my coach and fired my entire company, and I started over. The reality was I was almost out of money. I had 2 months worth of money at best, and I wasn't going to be able to continue to afford to pay them. The coach had recommended I keep some of them, just, because we can pair it off. We can kind of right size the ship a little bit, let's take it on water. We'll get it above the water line. And what for me was a really tough soul searching decision was I didn't terminate them because they were underperforming, but because there was a breach of trust on both sides. They probably shouldn't have trusted me because I wasn't really doing my job. And I certainly didn't trust them because they weren't doing their job. My issue was I wasn't holding them accountable like entrepreneurs will do. We don't want a boss. Well, we often stink at being someone else's boss. So a lot of that inner work had to come to the surface. I had to start working through it. And September 9th, 2006, I fired everybody and I started over.
So, okay. So you talk early in the book about the mindset shift, and really everything that you've said or you've hinted at so far, Todd, has been about mindset. So it's actually one of the things that drew me to wanting to have you on was what I read early in the book about some of that. So what's the chief mindset shift that you made? And because it's one that many others may need to make as well. So
sure.
Like you said, you had a lot of work to do on yourself. And so you got to a level of self-awareness that's important, but what's the big mindset shift that you had to make?
For me, and I think I think it falls into different categories for people, but ultimately I had to decide what wasn't working for me anymore. And what wasn't working for me was continuing to beat myself up on a daily basis. When you're $600,000 in debt, your itty bitty negative committee has 600,000 members to it, and it gets pretty loud in your head. I also had to realize that I couldn't do it alone. I needed to get some help. That's why I hired the coach and I made the staffing changes. I did what I talk about it in the book. I doubled down on my lifelong learning because I was always a seeker and always a learner. My coach says, here, you need to read Good to Great by Jim Collins. Pay special attention to the Stockdale paradox. What is your brutal reality? And I'd never heard of that. So I'm reading about, Admiral Stockdale and these POW camps and the torturing. And he was there for, I think, 8 years. And how he was able to make being a POW the defining moment of his life. Because I was very much blaming the external world for my choices. I was very much taking a victim or a martyr attitude. And my coach said to me, he's like, just let this sink in with you, because Stockdale talks about, this is my brutal reality. My brutal reality was I was $600,000 in debt on a 2 million run rate. completely, the business was upside down. He goes, Stockdale talks about, he goes, somehow, some way, I will make this the defining moment of my life. I will find a way somehow to get through this. And then what Stockdale talks about is, I just don't want to set a deadline for when it's going to happen. So like I talk about in my E4 process, I have to have an intention, not an expectation when that's going to happen. And so for me, it was to realize it, and this is just my philosophy, that every problem in business, whether you own it or you work for it as a leader, every problem in business that I've ever experienced always comes down to one factor: people. It's always people. And in my case, it was the people staring at me in the mirror. It was me. And it, I recently, someone challenged me on that. Well, what if it's a money problem? Okay, let's talk about that. It's a money problem. You don't have enough money. Why don't you have enough money? Because I knew I was $600,000 in debt. I knew I didn't have enough money because of the decisions made by this person. And oh, it's a strategy problem. Well, it's made by a person. What if it's an execution situation? It's made by a person. What if it's a technology issue? Well, someone's in charge of technology. It's always a people person. But for me, I was so wrapped up in being a victim and being a martyr that I had to look first at me to then get out of that place. So for me, it was me.
Yeah. So that first piece of that mindset is saying it's mine. It's that accountability.
Right. Own it.
Piece, right? Own it. All right.
Absolutely.
So you hinted at something I want to get to in a minute about intentions and expectations. But before that, okay, so here's the trajectory at the big picture, right? Start a company, looks like it's doing pretty good, rock bottom, fire everybody, start over, rebuild the company, bigger, better, $6 million man, bigger and better, faster than ever. Then you decide you're going to write a book. Why'd you write the book?
So I wrote the book for the 27-year-old me, because no one told me any of this before I started. We read business books on how to write a business plan. We read business books on how to manage staff or do these different things, but no one talks about the dirty little secrets of being an entrepreneur and the mind part of why we do what we do. Because what we used to do, me and my friends who were entrepreneurs, we used to tell ourselves this complete lie that, oh, I do all this for my family. I do all this I would say I do it for my son. That's not really true. I did it for me. And if we're a workaholic, it's no different than being an alcoholic. We're dealing with internal demons in an external world. So, my perspective was I want to get to a $20 million staffing company. That was the only goal I had. That's what I wanted to do. So I would take on bad business. I'd make bad margin deals. I would give long-term credit problem or long-term payment plans, which created credit problems, because I was obsessed with this goal.
The top line number, basically.
The top line number. And I didn't pay attention because I figured sales will fix everything. How many times have you heard that? It doesn't.
From every salesperson I've ever worked with. That's
Yes.
where I've heard that.
Yeah.
Right?
And it was a fool's gold prophecy, and it was on me. And I had to recognize that why am I doing this business? So a dozen years ago, I met a guy named Simon Sinek, and I worked with him for a couple of years to figure out 2 years to figure out two words. Why do I really do all this? I do it to improve lives. So I bring that back into Diversified. And we're struggling along. We made some progress on the debt, but we started really doubling down on what our culture was. Where our culture was our number one thing was to improve lives. I got everybody to buy in. Then we started iterating massively. So we would fail constantly. And I used to think failure was the kiss of death. Then I realized that failure is actually the only way I'm going to learn and grow. Started working on that. And over the course of time, we fixed the business. We grew leaders. I didn't have to be the oracle. Everything wasn't through me, because of me, and to me. And then, boom, we make the Inc. 5000 6 times. The crazy thing is, I still wasn't happy. People I tell that story like, what do you mean you weren't happy? Because I was still getting the external validation. Once the last piece was for me was to redefine what success was, because success was still shooting for 20 million with profits. So I'd added that little caveat to it. Makes sense. Then I pivoted into, though, this doesn't fill my heart. This doesn't fill my soul. And so I decided for me, I needed to change my definition of success. And I went from externally to internally driven. And so for me, success is doing what I want, where I want, with whom I want, as often as I want to do it. I can go walk on the beach with my significant other. I can go play in the park with, I just had dinner with my son 2 nights ago. Best day ever. Because we sat and had dinner. How awesome is that? So I redefined what success is. And once I did that, I had a lot more abundance versus scarcity in my life.
and more mindset, everybody. So you mentioned something earlier. Is one of the things I wanted to talk about that you talk about in the book is intentions versus expectations. So first of all, we need to get your definitions, and then so define them from your
Sure.
perspective, and then distinguish between them because you have a strong opinion about this, and I think that
Yep.
that opinion will be helpful to people. So intentions versus expectations.
So let me tell you where I got my strong passion around this topic. So for the last 7 years, I've used a coach. His name is Dr. Danny Friedland. He's out of San Diego, California. And by his training, he's a medical doctor who studies the brain. And he and I for years would struggle about how do I meet my goals and how do I do what I want to do. And finally, one day we had this long conversation about expectation versus intention. And he shared with me, which shifted everything. He goes, you do realize that expectations are win lose. You either won or you lost. That's it. If you have intentionality around something, you have massive creativity, and you're literally using the most powerful part of your brain. The guy's got the MD, and he's got written several books. He works for the American Medical Association. So he kind of has massive credibility with me. And I said, tell me more. Because when we act with expectation, it's win-lose, and we're operating in the fight or flight reactive part of our brain. When we move into intention, we have creativity. So I use myself as that person. I'm $600,000 in debt. My intention was to get out of it. I didn't have an expectation because the bank wanted to know, when am I going to get out of debt? When am I going to pay them back? Couldn't tell them. But I was able to then move into creating a strategy around that intention. Then I could execute that strategy against that intention with a lot of creativity and not a lot of self-criticism, not a lot of criticism of my staff. And slowly the flywheel began to move. So the intentionality around it was awesome. Now pivot that into being a parent, working with my son, and we've worked a lot on our relationship. My intention was that he and I will have a great relationship eventually. The teenage years and all those challenges that parents face. So we had some tough years. And I don't sugarcoat it. We talk about it in the book. But my intention was to have a loving, connecting relationship. That's it. I had no expectations. So what I started doing is I started behaving towards those intentions. I started showing up with that intentional. I started creating connecting conversations to tie to that intention versus the expectations, which I've heard from a lot of parents is, you're going to come over every Sunday and have dinner with me. No, we've never done that. What does he want to do? He wants to come over a couple times a week and have dinner with me. Now I have even more abundance. So for me, and what I work with my clients extensively on is, let's have an intention of what we want. Let's keep that creativity vessel open versus having expectations and eventually going to reactivity, fight or flight.
And once we have the intention, and you said it, acting toward the intention, which creates the behavior, which then creates the result, right? So you talk about in the book about a 4-step process to walk, and I'd like you to walk us through that briefly because I thought it was really helpful, and I think people will find it really valuable.
So if anybody's just listening to this, I would always tell them to recommend, and we talk about it again in the book, the active learning cycle, which is a very, it's a comprehensive process for problem solving. I've kind of tried to distill it down into 4 steps in my E4 process. And it goes back to the story I just told you about being in debt. Identify what's not working for me. So being in debt wasn't working for me. That's step 1, identify what's not working. Step 2, set an intention, not an expectation. Step 3, create a strategy and a plan and take action against that intention. Step 4, get help, iterate, continually learn through that, pivot as necessary, and then repeat. And we would literally do this on a daily basis back at Diversified. So then, we'd try this on Monday, a bunch of things, keep what works, get rid of the rest. Okay, what is our intention today? Or what was our goal? Our goal is still to get out of debt. We're now down to $400,000. We still got a lot of debt to get out of. And I would just talk openly about it. I mean, imagine being the first person to come interview with me after I fired everybody. Her name was Becky, and she was with me.
Hello, we are $600,000 in debt, and you're going to help me get out of it.
So I talk about it in the book. I call it authentic, transparent, and vulnerable. Be ATV. And I'm telling Becky this story, and she's looking at me. She's just out of college. She's like, "Oh my gosh, you're like the most honest person I've ever met. I so want to work with you. I want to help you fix this problem." I'm like, "You do? You're kidding!" I can't believe
she selected herself.
Yeah, it's like, you're hired. Becky did every single job in my company, sometimes even including mine during her tenure with me, because she was just a lifelong learner. She was just a curious George about all these different things. And she just was so anchored in that four-step process. She goes, I love the fact that we can identify something in the business that isn't working. I love the fact that we can create an immediate intention in this meeting. And then by lunch, we can take an action towards it. We can see if it's going to work or not, when it would be appropriate or longer term. But people that it brought in the right kind of employee for us who fit our culture, who fit our belief system. It's kind of like branding. Great branding either brings in your ideal client or repels your non-ideal client. How we ran the culture of the company brought in those people, and we came up with a process called hire for DNA, not for resume, because we found that we did really well with really good people who kind of drank the Kool-Aid, who bought into what we do. None of them had a recruiting background. None of them worked in HR. We had people who came in from restaurant retail. We had people who came in from office administration. We had people who came in from medical backgrounds. My number two recruiter for many years, I got him at Olive Garden. He worked at Olive Garden. And he's come to find out he had a teaching degree. He taught for 2 years, loved the kids, hated the parents, and I found he made more money as a waiter at Olive Garden. Starting a young family. He's like, I can't work Saturdays and Sunday nights anymore. I need to pivot into something else. I think I've got some skills. Will you invest in me? Will you train me? Will you teach me? Because I'll run through a wall for you. You're hired. Let's go.
Beautiful. So actually, I wanted, because we have a talent expert here, right? And we've had people on that talk about talent from different perspectives. It's been a while since I've had someone on that's got your background, Todd, in your resume, if you will. What advice would you have for us as leaders about hiring now? Now, when I say now, I'm talking about early 2021. This is going to come out into the world in March, and people might be listening to this in September or October or even in 2 years. But the point is, like, what's your advice to us about hiring today? And is it any different? Maybe that's what I really want to know.
Yeah.
What's different about hiring now than in the past, pre-COVID, however you want to frame that?
I love the question. I've not been asked the question that way. And I actually love that, because I think there's some real big shifts and differences when it comes to hiring. You have to really double down on being an employer of choice. There is not enough talent in the marketplace today. I just had this conversation with a client 2 days ago, and they're doing two things that we've recommended to them. The first thing they're doing is they are communicating, and then communicating again. They're trying to attract the millennials. Their target market for what they do is that section. Now they'll take other people, but that's really what they're going after. And millennials want more communication, not less. So how do we communicate? So how we communicate is also changed. So the frequency and the volume has to increase. The how also has changed, versus from email or other written forms. Video is so important. You've got to communicate with your staff during video, especially if you're working remotely, not in the same office due to the COVID pandemic. So video is so key. Also, it's important, especially with the millennials, that we help them be seen and heard. How do we do that? Second piece is create a psychologically safe work environment. Google's done a lot of work around that. So anybody who's really curious on how to create that psychologically safe workplace, Google's done a lot with that. There's some stuff in the Harvard Business Review as well. And in that psychologically safe workplace, we create a place where the employees are able to share, where they're able to create more of an environment where they're seen, they're heard, their thoughts and opinions are taken into consideration. They do realize that they have a boss or they have a leader of their team. But once we do that, and I always tell my leaders, I guess the third thing I say is speak last, don't speak first. If you want the best ideas in the room, speak last, because you'd be surprised how smart your staff is. And how do we know they're smart? Because they chose to work with you. I mean, they're smart.
The other thing is, if you talk first, they nothing else for me to say. Boss already said it. They don't want to hear from me anyway, right? I agree with you 100%.
And you get a bunch of yes people. You don't want a bunch of yes people. You want the best ideas. And whether I've got one client, I'm working with the CEO, the COO, and 4 division presidents. And I always say, guys, in your sub meetings, speak last. In our main quarterly planning sessions, CEO speaks last. And she's like, but I've got so much I want to share with them. I'm like, awesome, write it all down, and we'll talk about it at the end. They will all circle back. Kid you not, get through the entire 4-hour session. She's the last to speak. She's like, she'd done such a good job. They already had thought of like 9 out of 10 things. She had like, well, I think we should have, we don't have jeans Friday, jeans Wednesday.
Yep. And now taking this back to all the rest of us, if that happens to you, and now whose ideas are all those things? Theirs, not
Right.
yours. So it's not only where you get different and better ones, but you get more ownership of the ones that would have naturally come up. But if you go first, they're the boss's idea.
And if they own it, they're gonna champion it through. They're gonna push it. It more good things happen in teams, and let them own it.
For sure, 100%. So a couple of final questions for you, Todd. One is, I mean, anyone, some of you are, most of you are probably listening. Some of you are watching. If you're watching, you might know the answer to this next question or have a guess. But what's something you do for fun, Todd?
Well, anybody who's watching, I have to be honest and represent who I am. I'm a bit of a baseball geek, bit of a baseball nerd.
All right, for everyone who's only listening. By the way, if you're only listening, you can watch any of these and go to remarkablepodcast.com. You can always watch these. But behind Todd, like in the back of his study or whatever room he's in, like way back there, I mean, I don't know, there's 100 baseballs or something like that on shelves. Okay.
There's 300 baseballs. You can't see it. I've got another dozen jerseys lining the wall. So when I was building my life by design and I retired from being a CEO to being a full-time coach, I thought, I'm going to be spending a lot of time at home and I want to build an office that I can't wait to get downstairs to. And it was all very much laid out in my head. And that's where I come to. This is my happy place. This is my baseball room. It's my home office. And it's the place that I literally walk down the stairs and I'm at work, and I am so much more productive being in an environment that gets me vibrant and excited.
So what you do for fun is you love baseball, but take it one more step. What's something that you do for fun?
Yeah,
I got you off track. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh no, that's all. It's all good. So not only am I a fan, not only am I a collector, not only a sports memorabilia, etc. I still play, and I still play fast pitch baseball. Some people would argue I play well, and some people would argue that I'm not so good, and that's okay. But I will play in tournaments in Michigan, in California, not California, Las Vegas, in Arizona, in Florida. And what I love about baseball is it's something I'm never going to master. Kind of like business, kind of like life. And I love spending time. I get a chance to interact with a lot of former professional athletes, and we talk about a lot of the same things, which is some of the frustrations that they experienced as a player, leadership challenges they had in the teams they played for, as well as how they dealt with failure. Think about it like this. If you're a successful baseball player, you play Major League Baseball or minor league baseball, you're pretty good. You're one of the best in your area. You're one of the best in your communities. You're one of the best in your states or in your regions. But when you get with all these other good players, you're one of many. So that first takes a hit to the ego. Second is, if you're good in professional sports, you hit 300. Now, what does that mean? You failed 7 out of 10 times. And talking to them about how they manage that, how they work through that. And then the last thing I asked them is, how do you guys differentiate the talent, especially the people who are now in management positions with Major League Baseball? They said the biggest thing, going back to where we started, is mindset. It's how that athlete approaches success, how that athlete approaches the failures they're going to experience, because it's inevitable, and how are they a good teammate? Are they easier to work with? Is it about me or is it about we? That's where I love spending. I can just sit there and we can stay up all night talking about philosophies and different things, because then they ask what it's like to be a CEO. Or they ask what it's like to lead people in the business world. And they're like, my gosh, our worlds are a whole lot more common than they are different.
2 comments for you and for everybody. Number one is, everybody, just recently, I'm looking at the thing about 2 weeks before Todd, I had Todd Stottlemyre, the former Major League pitcher, on with me. So anyone who's watching this and is loving this conversation with Todd about baseball, you got to go back and listen to Todd Stottlemyre. And we actually talked about this hitting 300 thing and all that. But the other thing I want to go back to is, think about what Todd just said, everybody, as you replay this conversation, thinking back to this idea of DNA, not resume. And now what Todd's saying is mindset, not athletic skill set. Same basic idea in a different field. Todd, I've got 2 more questions for you. The first one is the one that I ask every single guest, the only one I told you I was going to ask you, which is, what are you reading these days?
So I'm actually reading a book called Leading Well from Within. and it was written by my coach, Dr. Danny Friedland. And I'm reading that because um, Danny's in a stage of his life where he's been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and he's got a very short runway. And as I'm working with him and what we're coming up to probably our final days, I'm really doubling down so I can get the most learning from him. He's been not only a coach but a mentor and a friend, and so I'm reading the book because I'm going to have questions for him, and I want to ask him. And his goal in life, and it's so powerful because he talks about he's decided, like Stockdale, his cancer didn't happen for him; it happened for him, not to him. And so he's doubling down on his legacy. And so part of what I want to do is, as I talk about in the book, Danny opens my book and he closes my book, but I get a lot of questions about him. And someday when he's gone, I want to make sure that I'm able to honor all the hard work, love, and generosity he's shown me by passing his legacy on to others. So that's why I'm rereading that book.
Leading Well from Within by Danny Friedman. So now the question you've really wanted me to ask from the very beginning, Todd, like where can we learn more about you and your work and the book? Where do you want to point people?
So if anybody's interested, you can certainly find me. I'm pretty easy to find on the internet, extraordinaryadvisors.com. My book is from suck to success.com. And I'd like to offer two things to your listeners. Write to me, Todd at Extraordinary Advisor. Tell me you heard me on Kevin's program. And I'm happy to give you 30 minutes of my time to help you get unstuck around anything you're feeling around imposter syndrome, leadership challenges. I just talked to somebody about parenting challenges the other day who had heard me on a different program. I love doing that because it allows me to live my improved lives. It allows me to give back to others. Recently talked to a young lady who was a solopreneur. She was just starting her little business. And I spent an hour on the phone with her because I was so immersed in her passion. She's never going to be a coaching client. That's okay. I hopefully have made a little bit of an impact. Allowed, she goes, "Oh my gosh, I've got 7 takeaways from this call." I'm like, awesome. So I'm happy to do that. Also, if you go to my website, I'm giving away the first chapter of the book. Feel free to sign up for that, and we'll get that to you.
All right, Todd Palmer, everybody, the author of the new book, From Suck to Success, a guide to extraordinary entrepreneurship. And Todd, it's been a pleasure to have you. Question for everybody else, though, before we wrap up. And that question for all of you is this: now what? What are you going to do with this? What action will you take as a result? Now, Todd and I both hope you go buy a copy of his book, but that's not really what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about here is what ideas did you hear from Todd? Maybe it was something about thinking about your hiring process. Maybe it was thinking about creating that culture so you're an employer of choice. Maybe it was something more personal. Maybe it was that you were inspired by something you heard from Todd, which is fantastic. But what will you do as a result? The challenge for us always is not just what did we hear or what we found interesting, but what will we do with what we learned? And so thank you for giving us so much to think about in that regard, Todd. And thanks so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. It was truly a great way to end my day.
There you go. Everybody, this episode was brought to you by our new book, The Long Distance Teammate, Staying Engaged and Connected While Working Anywhere. You can learn more by going to longdistanceteammate.com because there's a big difference between working from home and being a member of a successful remote team. And on that note, I will leave you all, but it's only 1 week because I'll be back here next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.